Hi, everyone. It's about 2 minutes before the top of the hour, so we are going to give folks just another minute or two to join. We will be starting shortly. Thank you so much. All right, by my official timepiece, it is the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where in the world you are. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar, Understanding the Equation, How Next-Gen MSS plus MDR equals Full Threat Protection. My name is Amber Olson, Event Marketing Manager with Newspire, based outside Detroit, Michigan. I'm looking at the screen and seeing a few familiar names today, so some of you know my opening remarks perhaps even by heart, but I will share them with those who are newer to today's or to our Newspire presentations. So just a few things, a few logistical items that I'd like to mention. Today's webinar should last about 30 minutes, but we're happy to stay on a bit longer to answer additional questions as needed. Speaking of those questions, you can send them in at any time during the presentation using the the questions panel on your screen. Go ahead and use that, and we will address this at the end of the call. You'll receive a recording of today's session via email within the next 48 hours, usually within the next hour or two. And finally, the recipients of our lunch vouchers will be notified within the next 72 hours. I would now like to introduce you to today's speaker, John Ayers, Newspire's Chief Strategy Product Officer, responsible for organizational leadership specific to technology and security innovation, operations, and threat intelligence. Currently, John serves on a number of product advisory councils, and previously, one interesting fact is that he served as both a U.S. Army police officer and worked in federal law enforcement. John, with that introduction, I'd now like to turn it over to you.
Hey, Amber, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. As Amber alluded to, we're going to talk about what is mystifying the market today, and we're going to kind of go through and kind of discuss the explanation around what is MSS and plus MDR, and what's really, why is there so much confusion, and how does an MSS service plus an MDR come together, and what's the value of that? And then how does our vision for that next generation MSSP associated to it? So first of all, let's talk about MSS and MDR. A lot of people right now, we're going to use the IDC definition here. What is MSS? And MSS stands for Managed Security Services. It's really focusing around the clock remote administration and or monitoring, such as IT functions, your managed firewall. It's delivered by remote personnel at local SOCs. It's log management. It's things of that nature. So you see a lot of this services being offered like companies like ourselves and traditional MSPs or MSSPs, and it's really focused around the perimeter, right? And focused around those functions like policy management, change control, things of that nature. And most times it's actually included with a firewall or a managed router associated to it. So what is MDR? Right? MDR is a subset, it's a small subset. This is where we see a lot of clients or companies who leverage MDR or offer MDR is really combines the tools and technologies and the methodologies around full security, meaning really easier put said than done is it's threat detection and response. So they're really focused strictly on response, not remote monitoring of the device, policy management of the device, but simply doing log ingestion and basically detecting and responding based off of that. So what's an MSS provider and MDR provider? An MSSP is really, it says what it says, right? It's a managed security server. It's really designed for providing outsourced monitoring and management of security devices and systems. There's a lot right there, right? I mean, this is where the confusion begins of what an MSS provider is versus an MDR provider and what an MSSP does. Because that term, that definition in itself basically says, well, they're one and the same. But are they? So when you think about an MDR provider, we touched on these. These are people like, we'll call them out like Red Canaries and others that are really focused on just MDR. They won't do anything around policy management. They won't do anything around life cycle. These vendors are really focused and aim to improve the way they detect threats and respond to incidents. This really doesn't offset the issue that we're running with today, which is the lack of resources in the market. We have a lot of people who have keyboard time on firewalls, but we don't have a lot of people who can maintain that perimeter day in and day out. So this is where we see the fragmentation take place of specialized boutique providers like MDR providers versus a traditional MSSP. So how do we just demystify this? How do we really take some of the confusion or collusion that's taking place? The problem is that there's too many point solutions. Let's just call it like it is. Alone, there was 150 new point solutions entered into the market from various vendors throughout 2020. So really, at the end of the day, what has it done is really caused more confusion around what do I need versus what do I actually need to accomplish. And the key here is what do I need to accomplish? Because the problem you have with an MSS, we have a lot of traditional managed firewalls out there that MSSPs are managing on a day in and day out. And then we have MDR, which really came to life in the 2016 timeframe. And it really has taken off because it's allowed people to really focus in on what is important, which is the threat. How do I detect that threat? How do I quickly respond to that threat and actually do something around that, around the point solutions? And even more so, as we moved into the cloud, it's really causing more confusion around what can be done. So how do we understand the solution going forward? It's a combination of everything. What I mean by that is that you need to work with what we call the next generation MSSP, and Newspire being one of those that are out there. And why is it important? Because we have multiple pillars here. Not only with the point solutions, with the life cycle and the management of the MSS side, but also the managed detection and response. Why is that important? Because this is an opportunity for an MSSP in the next generation world to customize the solution set necessity to the client. And some of the things that's important to note here is that too often we're dealing with clients that are being told that, hey, take this, solves this, take this, solves this. The next thing you know, you do an inventory of your assets and you've got 40 things and you're asking yourself, what does 40 do versus number one? And oh, by the way, I've got 3 different providers in there trying to manage all this stuff and all this junk or whatever it is that you've got, but yet it's still not customized to your needs. It's really important to note that's really what you're trying. You're buying these things to solve your problem and put into your types of controls to solve those issues. So the headwinds in today's businesses are facing because of this. Cyber threats have continued to escalate, all right? The point solutions are continuing to increase and the complexity is still there. Mobility and cloud, now more than ever due to the pandemic and COVID-19, has increased our complexity of how to manage those devices, not only from patch management to endpoint detection, response, and protection. That alone is confusion. The security experts are high in demand. We still know there's like 3.5 million open recs today throughout the United States and the world. So it's also difficult to retain, and they're expensive. Let's just call it expensive. And security solutions themselves are difficult yet expensive to maintain. Why? Because it's changing. We're changing every day. Our threat intelligence that we get is changing the makeup of your firewall. It's changing the makeup of your perimeter. It's changing the makeup of your endpoint. So how do you stay ahead of that? Well, the challenge you have with traditional MSPs and staying ahead of that is they miss the mark, right? This goes back to customization to your needs. They're not forward thinking because they're still working in a point in time. They're not evolving. One of the things that we pride ourselves here at Newspire is innovation. Is continue to bring all these solutions together. They're falling behind. Why are they falling behind? Because they're not partnering, or they specialize in a specific area, which is great, but that specialization may not be enough and not agile enough to move with you. And ultimately, what happens? Customers are not happy. So how do we do this? How do we help as an MSSP next generation? The security in action. We have a place where we talk about our security action, where we do nothing. We start with a discover. We understand where you're at in the industry. We recently launched on the 28th of January our TMT tool, which is our threat modeling tool. It allows us to kind of look at you and where you're at and what the attack techniques or TTPs are being used in that industry. And we can now form a better solution to solve for your problems, not only for your industry needs and to combat those techniques, but also to do what? Customize to your needs. So we at the center offer 4 different pillars, right? A traditional MSS service around working with industry-leading UTM providers. We have our own cybersecurity consulting service that allows us to deliver things like a compromise assessment, threat modeling, DFIR, in response, and ultimately manage detection response. And it's all at the center of who we are as a Newspire solution, which is really our value prop to clients. And it's important to note that, as you can see, all of these things there's only 4. There's not 5, there's not 12, there's not 6. It's 4. And why? Because we can specialize in these areas to customize a service for your needs that fits your desires and requirements and outcomes. So let's kind of wrap this up, and then we'll go into some questions here. So Newspire vision is truly this. We believe a next generation MSSP should do what? Bring clarity to confusion. There's enough out there today. Have your MSSP ask them the question, do you offer MDR? Do you offer MSS? What's the difference? Match the right technology to the client. Too often we're trying to shove a square peg in a round hole. Because why? Vendors, what are they compensated on? Selling more stuff, not services. And a lot of vendors today are finding that out. They're moving, recently a lot of vendors are starting to deliver services to wrap around their product because product just can't be sold anymore. They need services because people don't have, 1, the technology aptitude to run it. 2, it's confusing. 3, what did I really buy and what is it really solving for? The other is provide services designed by CISOs for CISOs. Why is this important? The CISO persona is an important piece today because it's not only driving to compliance, but it's around information security. What are the controls necessary, the trust controls, SOC 2, Type 2, Type 1? What are those things, PCI, that you need to put in place to satisfy? Too often, the problem we have with people who are not CISOs is they check the box of compliance, meaning that, hey, I'm compliant, I'm secure. Answer is wrong. Compliance is a great framework like NIST 853, PCI, GBLA. They're great frameworks, but now the execution on managing the controls is the one piece. So too often what's happening here is if you're not building services for CISOs, built by CISOs, it's a set it and forget it mentality. Be sure, be there when you need help. This is a problem today more so than ever because MSS providers are not selling MDR. MSSPs are not offering an MDR, so there's no detection. In essence, they really like you to buy other services like DDoS and things of that nature that is looking at your wire versus actually looking at applications. When we all know today, it's all about the applications. Provide technical service with a human touch. This is where it gets important, right? We want to put people there for you who understand your environment. Remember I touched on back in the security and action around customization, discovery. The whole idea is understanding your problems and how do we solve those problems. And what helps us do what? Design a holistic long-term solution for you as the client. Not short-term, but long-term. And an important piece here is it's a journey. And we want to go with you. It's thought leadership, it's education. Our job is to come to you as your subject matter experts, as an extension of your team, to tell you what is happening and what battleships may be forming in the horizon in your industry. Now, how do I combat that? How do I get ahead of that? And then ultimately at the end is incorporate a people-centric strategy. And what I mean by that is put the right people. You want to make sure that the people you have supporting you 365 days a year. Are they follow the sun? Are they different types of concepts? Here at Newspire, one of the things we actually do is we have 2 centers. We actually really, in essence, we have 2 physical centers and a flex center that allows us to offset anything. So we've got people who are 24/7, 365 throughout the world ready to go to answer calls, which is an important concept because they want to be a part of your team. They have to be an extension of your team. So I want to take the pleasure and say thank you again for all of you for joining us. So we've got about a little over 15 minutes to kind of go through questions and comments and things of that nature. So I'm going to turn it back over to Amber, and we're going to dive into some of the questions or concerns that you guys may have around the confusion that we see in this market today. Amber?
Perfect. Yes, absolutely. Thanks, John. One of the questions I think you've already addressed, somebody was asking if our SOC support is 24/7, and I think you just spoke to that being 24/7, 365 with the various locations. But another question came in that I believe you were on slide 10 when this came in, just in case that helps give you some context. But someone said, can you elaborate on cross-technology and how the mark is being missed?
Great question. So the problem we have right now is we have a lot of this cross technology going on. SD-WAN is a great example. SASE is another example. You see a lot of people going out and putting these technologies in when ultimately, the poor man's VPN was a solution out there like DMVPN. So there's a lot of different cross technology solutions being missed. And what are they really trying to solve? In essence, what they're only doing is actually having you buy something else that may be solving the same issue, or ultimately, delivering on the same situation. So that's how I see it today, right? Because let's take an example right now. If you ask somebody today to tell you what's the difference between MDR and XDR, what would be their answer? A lot of people, it's the same thing. It depends on who you talk to. An XDR solution is an extended threat detection and response, which includes not only MSS, telemetry like managed detection, and the endpoint. A lot of people will tell you that XDR is the endpoint and that you don't need the telemetry because you're at the endpoint. And I would argue that, yes, the war can be won at the endpoint, but you have it across the entire perimeter to get the right response, the right evolution to your environment. Don't fall behind by just focusing on the endpoint, because the endpoint is just one piece of your environment. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Excellent. Another really good question that just came in, for those of us new to the industry, could you provide a tangible example of a type of activity or service covered as part of an MSS, but not as an MDR, or vice versa?
That's a great question. I was hoping that one would come up. So it's really, I'm going to keep it very simple. Managed firewall, managed gateway, managed router. That is a traditional MSS service and activity that is out there. So change control in that firewall, policy management of the firewall. Those are traditional things of a part of an MSS and not part of an MDR. An MDR provider is focused on doing what? Traditional threat detection and response, taking in that telemetry, syslogs, API feeds, application, and focusing on what? Enriching that information with threat intelligence and then responding and prioritizing that alert and that incident and managing that case. Not about going back in and making changes to the firewall as based on the findings you find out. That is still the responsibility of the end user. And a lot of times there's not people there that have the keyboard experience to say what I need to do. Do I need to put a geo-specific block in? Do I need to change this? Do I need to create a different VLAN to segment that? All those are things that are really traditional MSS type services that are not provided by MDR. And hopefully that gives you a kind of that vice versa as well. It was a great question.
Excellent. So if somebody was going to choose, MSS or MDR, why would someone choose one or the other, John?
That's another great question. So it depends on who you are, right? In an MSS world, let's pick on retail for an example. Like we'll pick on we'll pick on a pizza shop, right? An MSS service probably would work pretty good there because it's solving for vulnerability scanning, the ability to do application, up down status of the firewall because you're following PCI guidelines. That's your traditional MSS service. Where you see MDR is as I go up market, I need to be able to see things that are happening or detect things that may be happening in my environment, because an MDR provider also does what? Provides threat hunting. His ability to look for things that may not be, let's just say, triggerable from an alert framework of a SIEM. But with a threat hunter inside your MDR environment or your MDR offering, they should be able to provide those nuggets of things that may be by the technology. Remember, we always go back to what? People, process, technology. And that's where I think, so MDR will be an overkill for a retail, like a pizza shop, because they're really focused on what? Delivering pizzas, providing a secure environment to process credit cards. They've got a credit card data environment, a CDE environment, and they need to provide scanning of their service to ensure that devices are not coming on or going onto that CDE environment. It can compromise it. It's really not around detection, threat detection, right? Because they've already bought, stateful firewall type of services. They're using network segmentation, trust but verify. So MDR will be a lot of overkill for them. So hopefully it helps answer that question.
Great. Another question. As a provider, are the capabilities and team profile you need fundamentally different as an MSS provider versus an MDR? And are SOCs applicable to both types of services?
Great question. So let me start with the first one. Yes, the answer is yes, fundamentally different. What I mean by that is that an MSS provider is more firewall or vulnerability type, let's just call it tech savvy, right? A lot of keyboard, CLI types of things, understanding profiles, how to create, like an example, I'll give you a great example, Palo Alto type person, a firewall, a Fortinet person, these people who've been trained on that, Cisco, Firepower. Those are all traditional type of MSS, type services where you're fundamentally managing that firewall, managing the up-down status, the policies, things of that nature. Versus an MDR provider, it's more of a platform engineer, person who has familiarity with a SIEM, really understanding and it has a familiarity with intelligence around parsing, around content engineering, Python scripting. Those are different types of people. While there is some similarities of understanding, but at the end of the day, if you took a firewall person and stuck them on a SIEM, they most likely would not be able to function properly because it's a different world. It's a platform versus an actual device. And the other question you had was around, I think it was around SOC applicable to both. Absolutely, yes, true. SOCs are fundamental to both MSS and what? MDR. So from an MSS standpoint, we're doing what? Log management, log collection. We're being alerted on IDS signatures or IPS signatures or application control issues that the firewall is actually generating. In MDR, we're going a step further, not only on those signatures, but telemetry around the server, around the endpoint, around your cloud applications that are not driven by firewalls, and they're not driven by layer 7. So where a firewall ends at these is where this begins. So there is, why they're applicable to both, there is we'll call it a RACI of traditional outcomes from both sides of those SOCs.
Very good. So John, why now? And by that, I think the question goes on to say, so why are we seeing the convergence of MSS and MDR at this point in time?
The threat landscape is changing, right? I mean, I think it's a necessity that you have both because, look, firewalls are not going to go away. The perimeter is not going to go away. The adoption of the cloud is here to come and here to stay in the adoption and the protection of an endpoint. So, you've got to be able to bring all that information in from DNS to ISS, enrich that information, because too often right now, the problem you have with most firewalls is alert fatigue, right? You're getting alert fatigue because you're getting triggered on stuff and you now need to figure out, is it actionable for you? Threat intelligence is really helping that, and you can use that as an MDR type service, combining the two together to really deliver an advanced threat protection for our clients and detection. And people need to know quickly, right? If someone clicked on a phishing email, and that phishing email is not something that is being triggered unless you've got an anti-phishing service in there or yet another point solution. But if you've got the intelligence of information that we're seeing, like an emotep that could be triggered by just clicking on a phishing, that information has now been enriched because that alert got triggered with our threat intelligence and our MISP and our recorded future partnership. You're able to see those kinds of things. Think about this for a minute. If you've got a brand and you don't know that you've been breached, a lot of people don't know that they've been breached. We're a provider like a next generation MSSP like Newspire. We bring all those technologies together and we're actually monitoring the dark net. We're looking for things out there that eventually says, hey, Mr. Customer, guess what? A database was just sold out on the market and you've got emails in there and your clear pass texts, your passwords have been just exposed. A traditional MSS would not do that. A traditional MSSP would not have that, right? They would say, you've got to go buy that service and then we'll plug that, like, Palo Alto has wildfire and things of that nature. But what's the action? Did you detect that threat? Did you take action on that threat? So there's a lot of separation of state there, hence why a next generation MSSP is a necessity now more than ever.
Very good. All right, we do have a couple more questions, and there's some good ones. When assessing the capabilities of an MSS or MDR provider, are there specific certifications or qualifications to look for in their SOCs? Is there a standard in the industry?
There is, I wouldn't say there's a standard in the industry. You need to look at a traditional MSS MDR provider of who they've got, of bench strength, right? What is those certificates? Like an example, your threat hunters should have some type of threat hunting, certifications like our guys have today, right? Security Plus is a necessity. It might, for a good SOC to have, which we have a lot. If you're going to focus in on, a managed firewall service like a Fortinet, what kind of investment have you made? For us, we've got people who are NSE 5s all the way to 7s. So the answer to your question is yes, you should look for and challenge your providers. What are you bringing to the table? What are you investing? How much are you investing to ensure your people stay qualified? Because it's important to make sure that the people you're working with are technically savvy to the solution you're working with, especially for the MDR. Whatever SIM they're using, do you have a security engineering team that is there focused on the platform for lifecycle and optimization? One of the things that we did back early in 2020, we made an announcement to the world that we created what we call HALO. HALO stands for Health, Availability, Lifecycle, and Optimization. The sole purpose of that is to create a NOC that's focused on health and availability and a second team that's focused on lifecycle and optimization, not only from a firewall standpoint, but from a platform standpoint, because there's constant tuning and needs to customize that to a client's environment. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Excellent. If we have an MDR, does the SOC handle the entire response after a threat and alert the MSP?
Well, yes. I mean, if you've partnered with the right MSSP, the answer is yes, right? So if you're an MSP, which is the managed services provider, and you're offering, MDR service, the answer is yes. Because that way, the SOC is actually handling. Now, one of the unique things that we do here at Newspire, part of our MDR service, is we actually bundle in 60 hours of CERT. And what CERT stands for is Security Information Response Team. So it's an incident response team of plus 7 or more people that comprise of our implementation engineering, to SOC, to threat hunters, through threat intelligence. All those people, and that CERT team actually determines and handles that to get short-term containment for that client. Because what happens in traditional MDRs is MDRs are not getting everything. They're not getting a lot of the telemetry. They're only monitoring certain things that maybe a client thought was critical, but ultimately it was breached. So one of the things, and I'll be honest with you, most MSSPs will charge you a lot of money to do that type of CERT, where we've embedded it as part of our service, because we understand that there will be a response necessary or component over and beyond what you purchased, right? So this is about staying in our swim lanes, right? We want to be able to expand it because we want to be there for you, right? The client is our sole responsibility where we want to excel for them.
Excellent. A little bit of a forward-thinking question here, but do you feel is the role of MSS and MDR provider under threat with cloud transition? Is there a risk of being disintermediated as cloud security resides with the cloud provider?
Yes, I think there's a threat. This is where we as Newspire and our vision, if you have our business strategy, is really focused on 3 specific things: security event monitoring, cloud monitoring, and we're also focusing on what? Compliance monitoring. So it's important for us to note that when you talk to an MDR provider or an MSSP, that is exactly what you're looking for. You want to see that they've got all three branches of the stool that allows you to do the traditional, or what I would call the basic table stakes threat detection and response.
Excellent. All right, John, how about one last question here? From a high level, is an MDR considered proactive support while protection from antivirus is considered reactive?
So I'm going to change your statement a little bit. I think MDR needs to be proactive response, not support. Support, to me, I hear break fix, I hear things of that nature. An MDR provider should have what they call MTTD, which is mean time to detect, and MTTR, which is mean time to respond. So an example for us, ours is 5 minutes for MTTD, and respond is 15 minutes for P1s. So it's important to differentiate that, because a lot of MDR providers don't give you those MTTDs or MTTRs. And I will actually then, yes, the other piece here is antivirus considered reactive. Absolutely, unless you're monitoring, unless you've ingested that antivirus or that Sophos or Cisco AMP or whatever you're using as your endpoint antivirus service, Symantec or Norton, into an MDR provider. This is where it gets important, because if you don't, then it is very reactive. It's the after effect, because you're now opening a ticket with your provider. It says, look, I just got this big red screen here, and my antivirus says that it's quarantined something. Why would you need to do that when we should be already ingesting that feed of your endpoints and or your service, your cloud service that you're leveraging, so that we could do the TTD and the TTR for you guys? So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Excellent. Well, we've had quite a few rapid fire questions for you here, John. We'll let you catch your breath at this point. Thank you so much for all of that. Folks, if you are listening today or watching this later on demand, and there's a question you have that we didn't answer for you, you can always send them to webinars@newspire.com. I'll process that. I'll get it to the right person within our team and make sure you get the answer you need. So we do encourage you to do that. If you are interested in any of our upcoming webinars, including our 2020 Year in Review Threat Report Findings session, which is coming up later this month on February 24th, I put a link to that at the top of the chat panel. That's probably our most anticipated webinar of the year. No disrespect to John in this presentation, of course, but that is coming up, and we do invite you to register and join us for that one as well. At newspire.com/events, you can see all of our upcoming presentations. With that, on behalf of Newspire, John, and our entire team, we really do thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you again next time. Thanks so much, and take care. Bye-bye.